One last Chapter 7 screencast. Let's analyze the case of a subsidy. And actually, it turns out a lot of countries subsidized fuel purchases, fossil fuel purchases, in particular oil, as we see from this graphic. The U.S. even has some favorable tax treatment of oil exploration that subsidizes fossil fuel costs. Anyway, but a lot of countries do more than we do by a good bit. And these turn out to be fairly inefficient ways to help your citizenry. And our welfare analysis can demonstrate that. So let's get to it. Here I've just picked Indonesia. It's one country that's somewhat notorious for subsidizing fuel purchases by its citizen. I followed the book in just assuming a constant price at which fuel can be supplied. And we haven't seen that before, but that's just a horizontal supply curve. And the way an equilibrium without a subsidy looks is just an intersection between supply and demand. That's the quantity, that's the price. Done. Well, some nations decide, we've got to help our poor people. Fuel is a big part of their consumption expenditures. Let's make that cheaper for them by giving them a subsidy. And what a subsidy does is, especially in this case, it's quite dramatic, the price that the buyer pays is lower than the price the seller receives by the amount of the subsidy, which we'll call small s. I think in the problem in the text, they give us a $1 a gallon subsidy. But here it's just the general case. There's only one quantity, we'll call it very creatively Q1, where the price buyers pay is exactly S less than what sellers receive, and that's going to be the outcome of that subsidy. There's no need to shift any curves to analyze a subsidy or a tax for that matter. You just look for the wedge between what the buyer pays and what the seller receives. All right, so the price buyers pay, of course, in this case is P1, and we are ready to analyze welfare outcomes. A, B, C, D. And notice over here I've got a new row in our welfare analysis table for government revenue. And government revenue, it's a positive if government's collecting taxes. Presumably the government is going to buy useful goods and services for its citizenry, so we count tax revenues as a positive. A subsidy, when the government has to spend money, we count government revenue as a negative, and that's because the government's going to have to collect money from its citizenry elsewhere, and that's going to reduce the citizenry's ability to buy their own goods and services because they've transferred that money to the government in taxes. So government revenue is a positive. When a government pays out money for a subsidy, we're going to count that as a negative. All right, well, let's start counting. In the market case, I'll use blue, producer surplus is simply A. There's actually no producer surplus, and that's because of this, price is just equal to marginal cost. There's no surplus on any gallon sold. So producer surplus is nothing. Government revenue is nothing. And the total is just A. Again, this is a very much simplified analysis. It would look a little different if we had an upward sloping supply curve. All right, well, let's look at the subsidy, what a subsidy does. And like I say, there's a problem with actual numbers that very closely parallels my example here, except for I'm using just generic terms, P0 and P1 instead of actual prices, and Q0 and Q1 instead of specific quantities. All right. Along comes the subsidy, and notice that consumer surplus has grown, right? It's the area below the demand curve and above the new price line. So consumer surplus has gone up to A, B, C. And producers, well, they get P0 as they did before, and so that's just equal to their marginal cost. There's a big fat zero there. But now, government has to pay. The government pays amount S per gallon for all Q1 gallons. So when we ask how much does that add up to, it's S times Q1. It's the area of this rectangle. Notice that I've got it marked. And so we have a negative B, C, D. And then when we total things up, we notice negative B, positive B, negative C, positive C, and then we're left with a total of A minus D. And we can look at who wins, who loses. Consumers have gained area BC, so there's more consumer surplus, and consumers of gasoline win. Producers no change. But the government the revenues, and that's taxpayers at large, have lost B, C, D. And we notice that what taxpayers have to pay in to support this program that's BCD, is bigger than the consumer surplus gains that are enjoyed because of this subsidy. So how much bigger? Well, the cost of the policy is bigger than the benefits by the amount D. So D is, again, this dead weight loss. Associated with this policy, it's the reduction in efficiency relative to the most efficient outcome. And we'll leave that alone. We'll put some numbers on this and do this again as a TAP. And then again as your homework. You'll really understand it by about a week from now.
Made with Doodlecast Pro.